Will you ride us there safely? Please, she begged. The Apache agreed. Swear you'll find me again. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a quiet afternoon, with the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty plains of the American Southwest. The winds whispered through the sagebrush, but the air was thick with tension. Alice had been running for days, her body weak, her clothes torn, and her heart pounding with fear. She had been left behind by the outlaws, a group of ruthless men who had taken everything from her. They had kidnapped her and forced her to travel with them, but she had managed to escape during a brief moment of chaos. Now, as she stumbled across the open terrain, the only thing that kept her going was the thought of safety, a place where she could be free again. She had no idea where she was, no sense of direction, but she kept moving, her instincts guiding her. Her mind raced as she glanced behind her, half expecting the men to come after her at any moment. But instead of the familiar sounds of the outlaws' pursuit, she heard something else. The soft padding of hooves on the earth. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She quickly scanned the horizon and saw a figure on horseback approaching in the distance. It was a rider, tall and strong, moving with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Alice's breath caught in her throat. Was it one of the outlaws, coming to finish what they had started? She quickly ducked behind a large rock, praying she wouldn't be seen. But as the rider came closer, she could see that he wasn't one of the outlaws. His horse was a dark stallion, strong and majestic, and the man himself wore a long, dark cloak that fluttered in the wind. His face was hardened, his features chiseled, and his eyes were sharp, scanning the terrain with a practiced ease. The man was Apache, and Alice knew that this could be her only chance for survival. She didn't know if he would help her, or if he would turn her over to the men who had been chasing her, but she had no other choice. Desperation took over. She stepped out from behind the rock, her voice trembling as she called out to him. Please, please, will you ride us there safely? The Apache warrior stopped his horse in its tracks, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. He could see the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion in her posture, and the desperation in her voice. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, but instead of drawing it, he reached for something else. His gaze softened just slightly, but his voice remained steady and firm. I will take you to safety, he said, his voice deep and calm. Alice felt a glimmer of hope surge through her chest. She took a few cautious steps toward him, her heart racing with the realization that she had found someone who might protect her. Swear you'll find me again, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't know why she said it, but something in her told her that she had just made a promise to herself and to this man. The Apache nodded, his expression unreadable. I swear, he said, and with that, he spurred his horse forward, motioning for her to follow. As they rode together, the wind picked up, and Alice couldn't help but feel that this moment, this journey, was only the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. I could feel the wind biting against my skin as we rode, the sun setting low behind the jagged peaks of the mountains. The Apache warrior beside me rode with ease, his presence calm and steady. Every now and then, I would glance up at him, trying to read his expression. His face was hard, his eyes dark and distant, as though he had seen more than his fair share of violence and loss. But there was something in his posture, in the way he held himself, that made me feel like he was someone I could trust. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew I owed him everything. If it weren't for him, I would have been dead by now, or, worse, back in the hands of those men who had taken me. I looked behind us, half expecting to see the dust clouds of the outlaws chasing us, but the only thing I could see was the endless stretch of desert behind us, growing darker by the minute. I kept my distance, but my heart was pounding in my chest. We had been riding for hours, and I could feel the exhaustion creeping in, threatening to slow me down. But I had to keep going. There was no going back now. How far are we from safety? I asked, my voice trembling more than I intended. The warrior glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. Not far, he replied, his voice calm and steady. almost as if the danger was nothing more than an afterthought. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. How could I be sure? I had been told lies before, by people who promised protection and safety, only to leave me stranded when it was convenient for them. This warrior was different, though. I could sense that he wasn't here for anything other than to help me. And yet, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading into the unknown. That night, we made camp near a small stream. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks, almost soothing after the hours of silence that had stretched between us. The Apache warrior started a fire while I set up a small space for myself, trying to keep my distance but still feeling the warmth of his presence in the air. As he worked, I couldn't help but watch him. There was a grace to his movements, an assurance that only came from years of experience. His hands moved with practiced ease, the way he tended the fire, his posture relaxed yet alert. He was a man who had seen the worst of the world, yet still managed to survive. "What's your name?" I asked, breaking the silence. He didn't look up, but I saw his lips twitch slightly, as if he had heard the question many times before. "You may call me Taha," he said simply. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I felt a little lighter hearing it. "Taha." I repeated, trying the name on my tongue. It felt strange, but comforting. He nodded once, then added, "And you?" I hesitated. I had never liked giving my full name to strangers, especially in this world where it could mean anything from betrayal to death. But with him, I felt a strange sense of peace. "Alice," I said softly. "Alice Whitmore." He nodded again, then turned back to the fire, poking at the embers. "We will leave at dawn," he said, as though the matter was settled. I nodded, though doubt still lingered in my mind. What had I gotten myself into? We were heading to his people, to his tribe. A tribe that might see me as an outsider, as a burden, or worse, as someone who didn't belong. I had no idea what to expect, and yet, I felt a strange sense of calm in his presence. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax, closing my eyes and listening to the crackling of the fire, knowing that whatever happened, I wasn't alone. The next morning, we packed up camp before the sun even had a chance to rise, and I followed Taha as we made our way toward the distant hills. Every step I took, every inch closer to the unknown, felt like a step towards something new, something different. And yet, as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a future I wasn't ready for. As we crossed the hills, I found myself thinking of the promise I had made to Taha, the words I had whispered the night before. "Swear you'll find me again." It was a promise, a bond between us that I didn't fully understand, but something told me that it was a promise that would change both of our lives forever. And just as I thought the day was about to settle into a peaceful rhythm, we reached the crest of a hill and I saw them. A group of riders, too many to count, coming in from the distance. Outlaws. My heart leapt into my throat as I instinctively looked to Taha, only to see his eyes narrowing, his hand resting on his weapon. This was not over. Far from it. I could see them now, their horses kicking up dust as they rode toward us, a group of men with hard faces and rough clothes. My heart hammered in my chest as I instinctively moved closer to Taha, my thoughts racing. These were the outlaws I had escaped from, and now they were here, closing in on us, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of their prey. Taha didn't seem fazed. His hand was still resting on the hilt of his knife, his gaze fixed on the riders. He was calm, but I could feel the tension in his body, the readiness for whatever was about to happen. We were outnumbered, that much was clear. But Taha had never shown any fear, and that steadied me. I had come to trust him, even if I didn't know all his secrets. He was a man of few words, but I knew this. He would do whatever it took to protect me. As the riders approached, I could see their leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, glancing at us with a cruel grin. His eyes locked onto me, and a shiver ran down my spine. Well, if it isn't the runaway bride," he said, his voice rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. "You're not so lucky this time, girl. We've got plans for you." I stood still, my breath shallow. This was the moment I feared. The moment they would take me back, force me into that life I had escaped. But I didn't show my fear. Instead, I glanced at Taha, hoping that he had a plan. He did. Without a word, he nudged his horse forward, slowly, until he was directly between me and the outlaws. "You won't have her," he said, his voice low. but carrying enough authority to make the outlaws pause. The leader's grin faltered, but only for a moment. "And what makes you think you can stop us, Apache?" the man sneered. Taha didn't answer right away. He simply reached for his bow and pulled an arrow from his quiver, notched it, and raised it to aim. The outlaws froze. The sight of Taha, so calm, so deadly, seemed to catch them off guard. For a moment, no one moved. "She's not your property," Taha said, his voice steady. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The leader, still holding on to his arrogance, glanced at his men. "We'll see about that," he muttered, but the hesitation in his voice was clear. Taha was no ordinary warrior. He was a force to be reckoned with. And as I watched him, my heart swelled with a sense of gratitude I couldn't fully express. He was risking his life to protect me, to keep me safe. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The outlaws were dangerous, and they wouldn't back down easily. The leader motioned to his men, and suddenly they were circling us, trying to box us in. But Taha was faster. In one smooth motion, he spurred his horse forward, leading me away from the circle of outlaws, moving with a speed and grace that left them scrambling to catch up. "Follow me," he said, his voice a command. "Do not stop, no matter what." I didn't need to be told twice. I dug my heels into my horse's sides, urging it to gallop after him. The wind whipped past us, and I heard the outlaws shouting behind us, but Taha didn't slow down. He led us through the desert terrain with a confidence I couldn't help but admire. The landscape blurred around us, the hills and rocks rushing by as we navigated through the wilderness. We were moving fast, faster than I thought possible, but I could hear the sounds of the outlaws' horses gaining on us. I glanced back for a moment, my heart racing. They were closing in. "Don't look back," Taha commanded, his voice sharp. "Just ride." I turned forward, focusing on the path ahead, praying that Taha's plan would work. We had to outrun them. We had to make it to safety. The sound of the outlaws' horses grew louder, their pursuit relentless. But Taha wasn't slowing down. He knew this land. He knew how to navigate it better than anyone, and I trusted him completely. We reached a narrow ravine, and without missing a beat, Taha guided us into it. The walls of rock on either side rose high, creating a natural barrier that shielded us from view. But the outlaws were still coming. I could hear them, their voices growing louder as they closed in. "We can't stop now," I said, panic rising in my chest. "We won't," Taha replied, his tone unwavering. As we reached the deepest part of the ravine, he pulled his horse to a halt, turning to face me. "Hold tight," he said, his eyes dark with determination. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was going to be a fight. We were going to have to face them, together. I could feel my heart racing as the sound of the outlaws' horses grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. The ravine we had entered was narrow and treacherous, the rocky sides rising high above us, offering little room to maneuver. Taha was still calm, his eyes fixed ahead, scanning the terrain with the same sharp focus he had shown since we first met. He knew we didn't have much time. The outlaws were closing in, and they would soon figure out how to follow us through this narrow passage. I could hear their shouts echoing behind us, the frantic pace of their pursuit telling me they weren't going to give up easily. We had to act fast. "What now?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. Taha didn't answer immediately. Instead, he urged his horse forward, pushing it faster, toward a bend in the ravine up ahead. I followed without question, my hands gripping the reins tightly, my breath coming in quick gasps. The walls of the ravine loomed closer, and I could feel the pressure building in my chest. We had to find a way out, and fast. As we rounded the bend, I saw a glimmer of light ahead, an opening, a way out. I could see the sky, wide and open, beyond the narrow confines of the ravine. But before we could reach it, I heard the unmistakable sound of hooves behind us. The outlaws were almost there. "Get ready," Taha said, his voice calm but urgent. He pulled his horse to a halt just before the opening and turned to face me. "You need to ride through the gap ahead. Do not stop, no matter what you hear." I nodded, fear tightening in my throat. Taha was about to do something dangerous, something I wasn't sure I could handle alone. But I trusted him. I had to. Without another word, he spurred his horse forward, moving into position just beyond the gap. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I knew he had a plan. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed my horse forward, urging it through the narrow gap between the rocks. The opening was smaller than I had imagined, and I had to duck low to avoid being caught by the jagged edges of the rocks. I could hear the outlaws behind us, shouting, their horses closing in. The gap was almost within reach when I heard a sharp crack, a gunshot. I froze, my blood running cold. But Taha's voice rang out, steady and commanding. Go, he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I urged my horse forward, pushing it harder, faster, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The gap was just ahead, but I could still hear the outlaws behind us. They were close, too close. My horse surged forward, and I made it through the gap, the opening wider now, just as the sounds of the outlaws' pursuit grew fainter behind me. I glanced back, but all I could see was the narrow ravine stretching behind us, and the faint outlines of the outlaws' horses disappearing from view. I had made it through, but I wasn't safe yet. I pushed my horse harder, racing toward the open ground ahead. The land spread out before me, wide, flat plains stretching as far as the eye could see. The wind whipped through my hair, and the sky above was an endless blue, a stark contrast to the dark, shadowed ravine we had just escaped. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I kept riding, my body aching, my mind focused on nothing but getting as far away from the outlaws as possible. But then I heard it. A shout, a voice calling out in the distance. I looked back and saw Taha. He had followed me through the gap, and now he was riding fast toward me, his horse moving with incredible speed. He reached me in moments, pulling up beside me. We need to keep moving, he said, his voice low and urgent. They'll be after us again, soon. I nodded, not daring to speak, knowing that he was right. We couldn't stop now. The outlaws would come for us, and they wouldn't give up until they had me back in their hands. But with Taha beside me, I felt a strange sense of strength I hadn't felt before. He had saved me once, and now he was with me again, riding beside me, protecting me. We were a team, and together, we would outrun the danger that followed us. The sound of hooves pounding the earth behind us told me the outlaws were getting closer. But I didn't look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, on the open plains that stretched ahead. We had to keep going. We had to find a place to hide, a place where we could catch our breath and regroup. And maybe, just maybe, we would finally be safe. I could feel the weight of the journey pressing down on me as the hours passed. The open plains stretched out before us, a never-ending sea of golden grass and distant hills. Taha and I had ridden for what felt like days, pushing our horses harder than we ever had before. But even with the adrenaline fueling my body, exhaustion was beginning to set in. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, and I could feel the chill of the evening air creeping in. We had to find shelter soon. My eyes kept darting to the horizon, half expecting to see the outlaws' figures riding toward us, but there was no sign of them yet. Taha had kept us moving, leading the way with an unwavering confidence that made me believe we could outrun the danger. Still, doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Could we really escape them? Could we make it to safety? As we rode, I couldn't help but glance at Taha. His expression was unreadable, as it always was. But there was something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself, that gave me hope. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke louder than anything he could say. I had come to rely on him, more than I ever thought I would. He had saved me once, and now he was leading me through the wilderness, keeping me safe. But even with him by my side, the danger felt real. We needed to find shelter, a place where we could rest and regroup. Taha, I called out, my voice shaky from exhaustion. How much further? He didn't look back at me, but his voice carried back over his shoulder, steady as always. Not far, he said. There's a canyon up ahead. We can rest there. I nodded, grateful for the information. A canyon sounded like a safe place to hide, at least for the night. I pushed my horse forward, the rhythm of its hooves pounding in my ears, and tried to ignore the weariness that was beginning to cloud my thoughts. The landscape around us was changing. The flat plains were giving way to rocky outcroppings, and the wind was picking up, howling through the gaps in the hills. Taha was right. There was a canyon up ahead, just as he had said. As we approached, I could see the narrow entrance, framed by towering cliffs on either side. It looked like the perfect place to hide, a natural barrier that could keep the outlaws at bay. But as we rode deeper into the canyon, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. The walls of the canyon loomed high above, casting long shadows that made the place feel eerily quiet. It was too still. Something didn't feel right. "We should be careful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Taha nodded, his eyes scanning the canyon walls. "Stay close," he said. We rode in silence, the only sound the soft clip-clop of our horses' hooves on the rocky ground. The canyon was narrow, and I could see the shadows growing longer with each passing minute. The sun was nearly gone, and the darkness was closing in around us. As we reached a small clearing, Taha stopped his horse and dismounted. He motioned for me to do the same. "We'll make camp here for the night," he said. "We'll need to be ready in case they find us." I nodded, dismounting carefully. My muscles ached from the long ride, and I was grateful for the chance to rest. As we set up a small campfire, I tried to shake off the unease that lingered in the air. The canyon felt like a trap, its walls closing in on us. But I trusted Taha. He wouldn't bring us somewhere dangerous without reason. As the fire crackled, Taha spoke again, his voice low. "We'll stay here until morning," he said. "We'll move again at first light." I nodded, pulling my blanket tighter around my shoulders. "What if they come tonight?" I asked, my voice trembling. Taha's gaze was steady, but there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. "They might," he said, "but we'll be ready." I wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes told me that he had already planned for whatever might come. I settled back against the rock, watching the fire as its flames flickered in the growing darkness. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the silence between us heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant rustle of wind through the canyon. And then, just as I began to drift off to sleep, I heard it. A sound in the distance. Hooves. Faint at first, but growing louder, closer. I sat up, my heart racing. "Taha," I whispered urgently, but he was already on his feet, his hand reaching for his bow. He moved with the quiet precision of someone who had lived through this kind of danger before. "Stay here," he ordered quietly. I watched as he moved toward the edge of the canyon, his figure barely visible in the shadows. The sound of hooves was getting closer. Taha was ready, and so was I. We had no choice but to face what was coming, whatever it was. I could feel the tension building in the air, thick and heavy like a storm that was about to break. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls, and I knew the outlaws were drawing near. My heart was in my throat, and I glanced at Taha, who stood motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the shadows ahead. He had already positioned himself in the perfect spot, his bow drawn, ready to strike. I tried to calm my breathing, but it was no use. The fear was creeping in, tight and suffocating. The fire crackled beside me, casting long shadows on the walls of the canyon, but the warmth it offered felt distant, insignificant compared to the cold fear that gripped me. I had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. We were in the heart of the wilderness now, with no way out but forward. I held my breath as the hooves grew closer, the sound now unmistakable. There were at least 5 riders, maybe more. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, trying to pick out their figures against the darkening landscape. Taha remained still, like a stone, his focus unwavering. He was calm, but I could sense the tension in his muscles, the anticipation of the fight to come. I wanted to speak, to ask him what we were going to do, but I knew better than to disturb him now. His silence was the calm before the storm, and I had to trust him. Then, as if the very canyon itself had swallowed them whole, the riders emerged from the shadows. They were coming fast, their horses galloping hard, their faces masked in the darkness. I could make out the leader first, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his cheek. The others were close behind, their eyes scanning the terrain, looking for any sign of us. I froze, holding my breath, praying they hadn't seen us. But it was no use. The leader's sharp eyes caught sight of Taha, and with a cruel grin, he called out to his men. "There they are," he shouted. "Get them." I could feel the adrenaline surge through my body as I scrambled to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had to run, I had to get away, but there was nowhere to go. We were trapped. Taha was already in motion, his bow drawn and aimed with deadly precision. He released the arrow in one smooth motion, the shaft cutting through the air with a sharp whoosh. It struck one of the riders in the shoulder, knocking him off his horse with a cry of pain. The others didn't hesitate. They spurred their horses forward, charging toward us with guns drawn. I could see the fury in their eyes, the rage of men who had been bested before and weren't about to let it happen again. Taha didn't flinch. He nocked another arrow, his focus unwavering. I didn't know how he could be so calm, but I followed his lead, scrambling to get my bearings. The outlaws were closing in fast, their horses kicking up dirt and dust in their wake. I could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on me. I was just one person, alone in the wilderness, facing down a group of ruthless men. But Taha wasn't going to let that happen. He was fighting for me, for both of us. The next arrow flew through the air, striking another rider in the chest. The man let out a sharp gasp as he fell backward, his gun going off in a wild shot as he tumbled to the ground. One more down. I could see the others hesitate, fear flashing in their eyes. They didn't know what to make of Taha, this quiet, deadly man who was taking them down one by one. They were used to being the hunters, not the hunted. But now, they were being forced to confront a danger they hadn't expected. The leader cursed, his face twisted in rage, and raised his rifle. He fired, but the shot missed by a mile, his aim thrown off by the panic creeping in. Taha didn't waste a second. He dropped to one knee, fired a third arrow, and struck the leader in the leg. The man screamed in pain as he fell from his horse, clutching his wounded leg. The remaining riders, seeing their leader incapacitated, hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to keep charging or retreat. That hesitation was all Taha needed. He stood up, ready to take the fight to them, his stance firm and unyielding. "Leave now," he called, his voice low and commanding, "or I will make you." The outlaws exchanged uncertain looks, their fear evident in the way they shifted uneasily in their saddles. They had underestimated Taha, and now they were paying the price. One by one, they turned their horses around, spurring them to flee into the darkness. The sound of their retreating hooves was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. We had won, but the victory came at a cost. I turned to Taha, my heart still racing, my body trembling with the aftermath of the fight. He was looking at me now, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I shook my head, unable to find the words to respond. I was fine physically, but emotionally, I felt like I had just been through a storm. Taha gave a slight nod, as if satisfied with my answer, then turned to gather his things. "We leave in the morning," he said, his tone steady once again. "Get some rest." I didn't argue. I knew we couldn't stay here long. But for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel a sense of peace. We were safe, at least for now. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping in the distance, the warmth of the morning sun slowly creeping across the ground. The cold of the night had passed, and now the world around us was bathed in a soft, golden light. I could feel the weight of the previous day's events pressing on me, but there was something different in the air now, something that felt like a momentary peace, as if we had outrun the danger, if only for a brief time. I took a deep breath, the scent of the desert morning filling my lungs, and glanced over at Taha. He was already awake, sitting by the fire he had rekindled, his back straight, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was no rest for him. He was always alert, always on guard. But there was something else in his demeanor this morning. He seemed more at ease, if only slightly. I gathered my things in silence, careful not to disturb the calm that had settled over us. I didn't know where we were headed, but I trusted Taha to lead the way. He hadn't steered me wrong yet. As we finished packing, Taha stood up and motioned for me to follow. He didn't speak, but the way he moved, efficient, purposeful, told me that he had a plan. I didn't question it. We had been through so much together, and in these moments of silence, I had come to understand him better than I ever had before. He was more than just a warrior. He was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, yet never let it show. We rode through the canyon, the walls rising high around us, casting long shadows that felt like protective barriers. The path was narrow, but the horses moved easily through it, as though they too understood the importance of the journey. Every now and then, I would glance over at Taha, but he was always ahead of me, leading us forward with a steady hand. It was as if he had already mapped the entire land in his mind. His confidence was a strange comfort, one I couldn't quite explain. As we moved deeper into the canyon, I felt the weight of the past few days lift slightly. We had made it through the outlaws, through the night, through the fear that had gripped me at every turn. But now, it was just us, Taha, the Apache warrior, and me, a woman who had nothing left but the clothes on her back and the trust one had placed in him. "We'll stop soon," Taha said, his voice breaking the silence. I nodded, knowing he would keep us moving at the right pace. We rode for hours, the terrain shifting as we passed through the canyon and emerged into a wide valley. It was a vast, open expanse, the kind of place that seemed both beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. But it felt different now. The air felt lighter, the land seemed more forgiving. As we reached the edge of the valley, Taha stopped his horse, and I followed suit. He looked out over the land, his expression unreadable. "We're almost there," he said, his voice quiet. "To safety." I felt a weight settle in my chest, a mix of relief and uncertainty. Could this truly be the end of the chase? Could we finally be free of the danger that had hung over us for so long? Taha turned to me then, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "We stay here for the day," he said. "Rest. Tomorrow, we move again." I nodded, grateful for the time to recover. The journey had taken its toll on both of us, but I could see the weariness in Taha's eyes as well. He wasn't invincible, even though he seemed like it sometimes. We made camp at the edge of the valley, near a small creek that wound its way through the grass. The sound of the water was soothing, a welcome change from the silence of the desert we had traveled through. Taha set to work preparing the fire, his movements swift and practiced. I helped where I could, but mostly I just watched him. There was something comforting in his presence, something steady. As we sat down to eat, the fire crackling between us, I realized just how much I had come to depend on him. I had nothing left but the clothes on my back and the promise he had made to protect me. And yet, it felt like enough. It felt like he was all I needed. Taha looked up from the fire, his gaze softening just slightly. "You are safe now," he said, as if to reassure me, though I had no reason to doubt him. For now. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed them. I had never been one to trust easily, but there was something about Taha that made me want to. He wasn't just protecting me out of obligation. There was something deeper there, something unspoken that I couldn't quite understand. But I was beginning to feel it. A connection, a bond forged in the fire of survival. As we finished eating, I lay back on the ground, staring up at the stars. The night was clear, the sky stretching out above us in a vast sea of light. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, or the days after that. But in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. We were safe, for now, and that was enough. I woke up to the sound of the wind rustling through the grass, a soft, soothing sound that seemed to carry away the remnants of the fear and tension that had clouded my thoughts. The morning light was just beginning to break over the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley where Taha and I had camped for the night. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the smell of the earth and sagebrush filled the air. For the first time in days, I felt the weight of the journey begin to lift, if only a little. It was strange, this feeling of safety. I had spent so much time running, so much time looking over my shoulder, that now, in this quiet place, I couldn't help but feel like I was in a dream. But there was no time for dreams. I had to focus. I sat up, my muscles sore from the ride, and watched as Taha moved quietly around the camp, gathering his things. He was already preparing to leave, his movements efficient, purposeful. I didn't know where we were going next, but I trusted him to lead the way. We had been through so much together, and even now, when everything seemed still, I knew the danger wasn't far behind. The outlaws would come for me. I had no doubt about that. And even though we were safe for the moment, I knew we couldn't stay here long. Taha glanced up at me as I stood and packed my things. "We leave soon," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "You're ready?" I nodded, though my heart still beat faster than it should. I wasn't sure I would ever feel truly ready for what lay ahead, but I had no choice. I had to keep moving. Taha was already saddling his horse, his face a mask of calm determination. He was always calm, always in control. It was one of the things that made him such a formidable presence. I followed his lead, not saying much as we finished preparing. For the day, there was no need for words. We both knew what was at stake. As we rode out of the valley, the wide plains stretched before us again, endless and barren. The sun was higher now, its warmth hitting my skin and making me squint against its intensity. I kept my eyes on the horizon, trying to ignore the unease that still gripped me. The journey ahead felt uncertain, and the thought of the outlaws catching up to us lingered in my mind like a shadow. But I had Taha by my side, and that was enough to push me forward. He had already saved me once, and I knew he would do it again if it came to that. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change. The flat, open plains started to give way to rolling hills, the earth becoming more uneven. The terrain was growing more difficult, but Taha didn't slow down. He pushed forward, his horse moving effortlessly over the uneven ground. I tried to keep up, but my muscles were sore, my body aching from the long ride. I could feel the strain in my legs, in my back, but I didn't complain. There was no time for weakness. The thought of being caught kept me moving. "We stop at the river ahead," Taha said, breaking the silence. "We can rest there." I nodded again, grateful for the opportunity to rest. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting a golden hue across the land, and I could feel the heat of the day fading. My stomach growled in protest, reminding me that I hadn't eaten much that day. Taha seemed to hear it, though he didn't say anything. Instead, he slowed his horse, guiding us toward a narrow stream that cut through the hills. The water glistened in the fading light, its surface calm and inviting. Taha dismounted first, then helped me down from my horse, his touch gentle but firm. We made our way to the water's edge, and I bent down to drink, savoring the coolness of the water. It tasted fresh, sweet, and for a moment, it felt like a small victory. As I drank, I could feel the weight of the past few days lifting, just a little. It was as if, for the first time, I was allowing myself to believe we could actually make it. "Rest," Taha said quietly, sitting down on a rock near the water. "We leave at first light." I didn't argue. I sank down beside him, my body too tired to go any further that day. As I sat there in the cool evening air, I felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Taha. He hadn't just saved me from the outlaws. He had given me a sense of purpose again. For so long, I had been running, driven by fear, by the need to survive. But now, with him, I was beginning to believe there could be something more, something worth fighting for. The thought made me uncomfortable. I had never allowed myself to think that way before. I had always told myself that survival was enough. But Taha was showing me something different. He wasn't just protecting me out of obligation. There was something more, something unspoken, but powerful. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it. And as we sat there by the river, the firelight flickering in the distance, I realized that whatever came next, I wasn't alone anymore. We were in this together, and that gave me the strength to keep moving forward. The night grew darker around us, the sounds of the river and the wind becoming the only company we had. But in that moment, it felt enough. We would face whatever came next, and we would do it together. I woke to the soft murmur of the river and the rustling of the trees as dawn broke over the valley. The air was cool, crisp with the promise of a new day. The night had been quiet, peaceful, a rare moment of stillness amidst the chaos we had left behind. I could feel the weight of the last few days pressing against me, but it was a different kind of weight now, one that felt more like a burden shared than one I had to carry alone. I looked over at Taha, who was already awake, preparing the camp. He moved with the quiet precision I had come to expect, his face calm, his focus unshaken. I had begun to realize that this was just how he was. He had lived through hardships and struggles that I could never imagine, but still, he stood, always moving forward. I had no idea where we were going, but with him by my side, I felt as though we could take on anything. I sat up, stretching the stiffness from my limbs, and watched him for a moment longer before joining him in the tasks of packing up. There was no time to waste. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. The outlaws could still be out there, and I had no intention of waiting around for them to find us. As we finished gathering our things, Taha glanced at me, his voice low. "We move again," he said simply. I nodded, my heart already pounding in anticipation. We had been moving for so long, and the idea of another day of riding felt like more than I could bear, but I had no choice. I couldn't stop now, not when we were so close to freedom. We mounted our horses, and as Taha led the way, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me. I had grown accustomed to the constant tension, the fear of being found, but today it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe, like the world was holding its breath. We rode through the valley, the landscape changing around us as we went. The wide, open plains gave way to rolling hills, and the hills soon became jagged cliffs that rose sharply from the earth, creating a maze of rock and shadow. Taha moved with ease, his horse sure-footed and steady, but I could feel the unease in my own body. The terrain was getting harder, and the landscape felt less like a safe haven and more like a trap. "Stay close," Taha murmured without looking back. I didn't need him to tell me. I had learned quickly that in these moments, staying close meant survival. The path ahead was narrow, the rocks on either side sharp and unforgiving. We had to move carefully, each step deliberate, each move calculated. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, the tension rising as the silence around us deepened. We were deep in the canyon now, the walls rising high above us, casting long shadows over the path. I kept my gaze straight ahead, trying not to think about the vastness of the world around me, trying not to imagine the outlaws that could be lurking just beyond the next curve. But then I heard it, a faint sound, like the whisper of movement on the wind. My breath caught in my throat. It was the sound of hooves. I looked at Taha, who had already slowed his horse, his body rigid with awareness. His eyes scanned the rocks above us, his focus unshakable. "They're here," he said quietly. I could feel the tension in his voice, but there was no fear, just resolve. He had faced worse than this before. He had survived. And so would I. "Stay behind me," he added. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And I obeyed, falling into place just behind him as we continued through the narrow canyon. The sound of the hooves grew louder, closer. My heart began to race, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins. The outlaws were close now, too close. I glanced at Taha again, but his expression remained calm, as if he had already mapped out our escape in his mind. I trusted him completely, but in this moment, I couldn't shake the fear. The canyon had narrowed even further, the path becoming more treacherous with each step. The walls of rock seemed to close in around us, making it harder to maneuver. If we were going to get out of this, we needed a plan, and fast. Taha shifted in his saddle, his eyes narrowing as he looked ahead. "We make our stand here," he said, his voice low but firm. I felt a surge of panic. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight. But Taha didn't answer. He simply signaled for me to move closer, and without hesitation, I obeyed. We stopped at a narrow opening in the canyon wall, a small crevice where we could hide and prepare for whatever was coming. I dismounted quickly, my hands trembling as I checked my gear. Taha didn't waste time. He was already scouting the area, his eyes sharp and focused, watching every movement around us. I did my best to follow his lead, my heart thundering in my chest. "We won't be able to outrun them now," Taha said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we can fight." His words were a quiet promise, a vow that we would survive this, no matter what. I nodded, my fear mixing with determination. I wasn't going to die here. Not today. I wasn't going to. Let them take me again. As the sound of the approaching riders grew louder, Taha turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine. "Stay hidden," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "I will protect you." I knew he would. He had already shown me that he would do whatever it took to keep me safe. I trusted him with my life. And now, I was ready to stand beside him. The outlaws were getting closer, their voices growing louder, their horses pounding the earth with each passing second. The fight was about to begin. I could hear them now, their voices growing clearer as they closed in, the sound of their horses pounding the earth beneath them. The outlaws were here. They had finally caught up to us. My heart raced in my chest, every beat echoing in my ears as I crouched low behind the rocks, my breath shallow. The adrenaline was making everything feel both fast and slow at the same time. I could feel Taha's presence beside me, his calm, steady demeanor a quiet reassurance in the face of what was coming. His eyes were fixed on the opening, his hand resting lightly on the bough at his side. We didn't have much time. The outlaws would be upon us soon. I could see the flickering shadows of their movement through the narrow gap in the rocks, the unmistakable thud of hooves growing louder. My hands trembled slightly as I checked the knife I had been given, the blade sharp, its weight a reminder that I wasn't completely powerless. But I wasn't fool enough to think that I could face them on my own. This was Taha's fight. He was the one who had the skills, the experience. I had only learned to survive by trusting him. "Stay here," Taha murmured, his voice barely audible. I nodded, though I knew there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We had already made our stand. The canyon walls surrounded us on either side. The only way out now was forward. Taha moved silently, positioning himself behind the cover of the rocks. His bow was drawn, ready to strike. He didn't need to say anything more. The moment the first rider came into view, Taha was already moving. He let the arrow fly, and the sound of it slicing through the air was sharp and deadly. It struck the lead rider in the shoulder, sending him crashing from his horse with a shout. The other outlaws yelled in surprise, but Taha was already notching another arrow, his movements fluid and precise. I could see the chaos unfolding in front of me, the outlaws scrambling to regroup, their faces filled with fury. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected Taha to be so fast, so deadly. One of the riders turned to face us, his gun drawn, but he never had a chance. Taha fired again, another arrow piercing the air, taking the man down with one swift shot. The others hesitated, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. They had been prepared for a quick capture, for an easy victory. But Taha had made them realize that this wasn't going to be easy. I crouched lower behind the rocks, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were still trembling, but I knew I had to stay out of the way. Taha had everything under control. The fight raged on, the outlaws firing their guns, trying to retaliate, but they were no match for Taha's speed and precision. Every shot he took hit its mark, taking down one more rider with each passing moment. The remaining outlaws were scattering now, retreating, their confidence shattered. I could see the fear in their eyes. They weren't used to being the ones running, but they weren't completely defeated yet. The leader, the one with the scar across his face, was still standing, his eyes wild with rage. He had seen his men fall, and now he was determined to finish what he started. "You won't win this," he shouted, his voice filled with venom. "I'll make sure of it." He spurred his horse forward, his gun raised, aiming straight for Taha. But Taha was already moving. With a fluid motion, he dropped to one knee, his bow drawn once more. The leader barely had time to react before Taha's arrow flew through the air, striking him in the chest. The man's body lurched back, his gun falling to the ground as he slumped from his horse, lifeless. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, turned and fled, scrambling to get away from the fight they had lost. Taha didn't move right away. He stayed low, watching the retreating figures with cold, calculating eyes. Only when he was certain they were gone did he rise, slowly, his expression unreadable. I couldn't breathe for a moment, the weight of everything settling in my chest. We had survived. We had won. But at what cost? I looked at Taha, who was already making his way toward the fallen men, checking their bodies for any signs of life. I stayed behind, my hands still shaking, trying to process everything that had just happened. The sound of hooves had stopped, the echoes fading into silence. It was over. "Are you all right?" Taha asked, his voice softer now. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was all right. My body felt like it had been through a storm, my mind a jumble of emotions. But I was alive. We were alive. And that was all that mattered. He walked back to me, his movements as calm as ever, and I realized, in that moment, that I would follow him anywhere. He had proven, once again, that he would protect me, that he would fight for my survival. And I would do the same for him. The canyon was silent now, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees and the distant trickle of the stream. We had made it through the worst of it, but I knew the danger wasn't over. The outlaws would be back, but next time, we would be ready. Taha gave me a small, reassuring nod, and I felt a glimmer of hope, fragile but real. We could survive this. Together. I watched the last of the outlaws disappear into the distance, their retreating figures vanishing into the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but the sound of the wind and the stillness of the canyon. My heart was still racing, my mind trying to process what had just happened. We had fought and won, but at what cost? I glanced at Taha, who was already collecting the weapons from the fallen men, his movements efficient, almost mechanical. He didn't seem affected by the violence we had just witnessed. For him, it was just another day of survival. For me, it felt like the world had shifted. I had never been part of anything like this before. It was a strange, uneasy feeling, relief mixed with something darker, something I wasn't sure how to face. Taha glanced up at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something. Concern, perhaps, or maybe something more. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady. though I could hear the faint trace of worry in it. I shook my head, but even I wasn't sure if I was lying. My body ached, but it wasn't from injury. It was the aftermath of fear, of adrenaline, of living on the edge for so long. I was exhausted, physically and mentally, but I wasn't about to show it. I couldn't afford to. I'm fine, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Just tired. Taha nodded, though he didn't seem convinced. He had seen the toll this journey had taken on me, but he didn't press. Instead, he stood, gathering the remaining supplies from the fallen outlaws, making sure nothing of value was left behind. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times before, his efficiency almost chilling. I couldn't help but admire his calm, his ability to compartmentalize everything. He had lived through this, over and over, and somehow, he had come out on top each time. It was a strength I had never known, and now, for the first time, I felt a strange kinship with it. We leave soon, he said, not looking up as he worked. We need to find shelter before nightfall. I nodded, understanding. We couldn't stay here long. The outlaws might be gone for now, but they would be back. And next time, they wouldn't underestimate us. I know, I said. I'm ready. Taha glanced at me then, his gaze sharp, as if assessing me, making sure I was telling the truth. I met his eyes and held his gaze, trying to convey the resolve I was starting to feel. He nodded once, and without another word, he mounted his horse, waiting for me to follow. I did, feeling the weight of the decision that lay ahead. We were leaving the safety of the canyon behind and heading into the unknown again. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. As we rode, the landscape around us began to shift again. The canyon gave way to a small plateau, and beyond that, the land stretched out in wide, open plains. The feeling of being exposed was immediate, and I instinctively moved closer to Taha. The land felt endless here, the horizon a thin line against the vast sky. There was nowhere to hide, no rocks to duck behind, and no place to run. This way, Taha said, his voice low but clear. He led the way through the tall grass, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. We rode for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky, beating down on us with a relentless heat. I was grateful for the occasional breeze, but it did little to cool the sweat on my brow. The land was vast, and with every passing minute, I felt more and more like a small piece in a much larger puzzle. But Taha kept moving forward, and I followed. We didn't speak much. It wasn't that there was nothing to say. It was just that there was nothing left to say. We were in this together, and the silence between us felt more like a bond than anything else. Finally, just as the sun began to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, we reached a small copse of trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough to provide some shelter from the wind. Taha dismounted first, tying his horse to a nearby tree, and I followed suit. We set up camp quickly, the routine familiar now. Taha started a fire while I unpacked the supplies, but my mind wasn't on the task. It was on the journey ahead, on what would happen once we were back on the move. Taha hadn't said it, but I knew. We couldn't stop here. This wasn't safety. It was just a brief reprieve before we moved forward, deeper into the unknown. As I sat by the fire, the warmth from the flames a welcome relief, I found myself watching Taha again. He was sitting across from me, his face illuminated by the firelight, his expression distant. I wondered what he was thinking, what weighed on his mind. He had been through so much, and yet, he carried it all so effortlessly. But I knew there was more to him than that. There had to be. The silence stretched on between us, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition that we both knew what came next. We were on the run, and we would stay that way until the world caught up with us. Or we made it to a place where we could finally rest. We leave at first light, Taha said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Get some rest. I nodded, feeling the exhaustion creeping back in. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Taha with me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Tomorrow would come, and we would face it together. I woke to the sound of the wind stirring through the trees, a faint rustling that barely broke the stillness of the morning. The sun was still low in the sky, casting soft, golden light across the landscape, but I knew that time was slipping away. We had been on the run for what felt like an eternity, but there was no real end in sight. The feeling of danger never really left me. I could still hear the echo of hooves in my mind, the threat of the outlaws always lingering, just beyond the horizon. The fire from last night had died down, leaving only the glow of embers, and as I sat up, I noticed Taha already preparing for the day. His movements were silent, purposeful, as if he were in his element. He never spoke much, but when he did, his words were measured, calculated. He didn't have to say much. His actions spoke louder than anything else. I could see the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the area as though he were constantly on alert. It made me feel both safe and unsettled at the same time. He was a man who had learned to survive, to live in the harshest of conditions, but I knew there were ghosts in his past, just as there were in mine. The journey ahead would be no different. We would face whatever came, together, but I couldn't help but feel that this was a test of our resolve, of our ability to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. "We leave soon," Taha said, his voice steady, as he gathered his things. I nodded, trying to push down the worry that was bubbling in my chest. Every day felt like a gamble, a step into the unknown, but I couldn't stop now. The only way out was through. We had to keep going. I could feel the exhaustion creeping in again, the weight of the past weeks bearing down on me. We had survived the outlaws' attack, but I knew the danger wasn't over. It never really was. As we saddled our horses, I glanced back at the camp we had made. It was a temporary refuge, nothing more. The land around us was vast, open, and exposed. There was no real shelter here, just the illusion of safety. "We head north," Taha said, his voice breaking the silence again. "There's a village. We can rest there." I didn't ask how he knew. I trusted him, and that was enough. We rode in silence, the only sound the soft clip-clop of our horses' hooves on the earth. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. The landscape shifted again, the rolling hills giving way to a more rugged terrain, rocky and uneven. The air was thinner here, and the sun seemed harsher. I felt every mile in my bones, every inch of the journey adding to the weight of everything that had come before. The village Taha spoke of was still a distant hope, a flicker of safety that kept us moving forward. But even as we rode, I knew that nothing was certain. The outlaws might be gone, but the world outside the canyon was just as dangerous. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. Taha's movements remained steady, sure, and I followed closely behind, trying to match his pace. He had become more than just a protector. He was a guide, a constant in a world that seemed to shift with every passing day. His quiet confidence had a way of grounding me, even in the midst of all this chaos. We came to a narrow pass between two steep hills, the ground beneath us rough and uneven. Taha slowed his horse, motioning for me to do the same. "Stay alert," he said quietly. "We don't know who else is out here." I nodded, my senses sharpening. I hadn't heard anything, but the silence in the pass was too perfect, too still. The tension in the air was palpable. We continued on, every sound amplified in the quiet. The crunch of gravel beneath our horses' hooves, the wind stirring the dry grasses, the distant call of a bird. Everything felt heightened, as though we were walking through a dream, and the world around us might shift at any moment. I glanced at Taha. His face was set in a mask of focus, his eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced ease. He was the one who kept us moving, kept us alive. I wasn't sure where this road would take us, but I trusted him to know. As we moved forward, I noticed something that had escaped my attention before, the faintest trail of dust in the distance. It wasn't much, just a small puff on the horizon, but it was enough to make my heart skip. "We're not alone," I whispered, my voice tight with tension. Taha turned, his gaze following mine to the far-off dust trail. "We never are," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was a hard edge to it now. "Stay behind me." We both slowed, keeping our horses steady as the sound of hooves reached our ears once more. The riders were coming fast, but they were still too far away for me to see clearly. I held my breath, watching Taha for a signal, but he didn't need to give one. He was already ready. This wasn't the first time we'd been pursued, and it wouldn't be the last. I just hoped that this time, we would survive. We had made it this far, and I wasn't ready to give up yet. We would face whatever was coming together, just as we had before. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy as the riders drew closer. We had come so far, survived so much, and now we were once again face to face with danger. The dust kicked up by the horses hung in the air like a cloud, making it difficult to see exactly who was coming, but I could sense the urgency in Taha's movements as he signaled for us to stay still. His hand was tight on the reins, his eyes scanning the horizon with the sharp focus of a man who had lived through more than his fair share of fights. I stayed close to him, my hand gripping the hilt of the knife I had been given, though I knew it was hardly enough for what we were about to face. The sound of hooves grew louder, and the riders finally appeared from the haze of dust, their figures becoming clearer with every passing second. There were 3 of them, riding hard, determined, and all too familiar. It was the same gang of outlaws. I could see their leader in the front, his scarred face twisted in a sneer as he looked at us. The others followed closely behind, their expressions dark with anger and frustration. They had been defeated once, but now they were back, and they were ready for a fight. I glanced at Taha, but his expression was unreadable, his face set in that same calm mask he always wore. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but I knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them take me. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice low but steady. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to fight, wanted to do something, anything, but I knew better than to argue. Taha had a plan. He always did. The outlaws closed the distance, and the leader raised his rifle, aiming it directly at us. My breath caught in my throat as the barrel of the gun glinted in the sunlight. Taha didn't flinch. He moved with the same grace and precision that had kept him alive for so long. In one fluid motion, he reached for his bow and let an arrow fly. It cut through the air with a sharp whistle, striking the leader's hand with a sickening thud, knocking the rifle from his grip. The man let out a yell, clutching his injured hand as he pulled back in pain. The other 2 riders hesitated, unsure of how to react. But Taha wasn't done. He fired again, another arrow flying through the air, this time striking one of the men in the chest. The man fell from his horse with a strangled cry, his body crumpling to the ground with a thud. The last outlaw, seeing his comrades fall, pulled his horse around in an attempt to flee, but Taha was already on him. With lightning speed, Taha spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. The outlaw barely had time to draw his weapon before Taha was upon him, a swift, powerful strike knocking the man from his saddle. The fight was over before it had even truly begun. The last of the outlaws lay motionless on the ground, and the canyon was silent once more, save for the sound of the wind and the distant rush of the river. I stood there, my breath coming in quick gasps, my heart racing as the adrenaline slowly began to fade. I had never seen Taha fight like that before. It was almost as if he were a force of nature, unstoppable, untouchable. I felt a strange mix of awe and fear watching him, realizing just how little I truly understood about him. He had kept his promise. He had protected me. He always did. "Are you all right?" Taha asked, his voice quiet, almost gentle, as he turned to face me. I nodded, though my hands were still shaking, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was lying. My body felt numb, but the fear was still there, lingering, like a shadow that wouldn't quite leave. Taha's eyes softened for just a moment, but he didn't say anything more. He turned back to the fallen men, collecting their weapons and making sure nothing was left behind. The silence between us stretched on, and I felt the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. We had survived another attack, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. It never really was. As the sun continued to set, casting long shadows over the canyon floor, we moved quickly to gather what we needed. There was no time to waste. We couldn't stay here for long. Taha's eyes were already scanning the landscape, his mind already planning our next move. I followed him, my thoughts a jumble of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. But as we rode out of the canyon, the feeling of danger still clinging to the air, I realized something. I had trusted him, truly trusted him, in a way I had never trusted anyone before. And for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could make it. We would survive this. Together.